Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just ask you what you're afraid of. Mr. Speaker, I've been hearing from before we came into this session that the voters overwhelmingly support tax increases for education. Overwhelmingly support tax increases for education. You've been saying it all session long, Mr. Speaker. So why are you afraid to give them a vote to see if that isn't true, indeed true? Mr. Speaker, if you really believe the voters in this state would support tax increases, then let's find out. Mr. Speaker, please support this amendment.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment today. And actually, we just live in a republic, period. No adjectives, no other descriptors on that. A republic. Because it comes from the words res publica, the public thing. What this amendment seeks to do is to make this the public thing. The people reserved their ability of referenda because they wanted a check in the system. Right now, Mr. Speaker, there really isn't a check in the system. The 2/3 vote has been stripped from them. It has been stripped from them, Mr. Speaker, and this emergency clause that's on there right now will further strip their voice from them. That's why we have to do this amendment. Because the rule of law, our state constitution means something. The people's voice means something in this debate. And we should support it and support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the underlying idea of the amendment goes much to our constitutional checks and balances. In fact, my good friend from the 36th District, when he got up and spoke, he asked you to reference the Article 9 of our Constitution. I think it's an article that we all take very seriously. It talks about the notion of amply funding education. And I think that we can all agree, whether you're a member of this legislature or if you work across the street at the Temple of Justice, ample is a subjective term. And for 200 years, we've respected a political questions doctrine that says when there are non-justicable standards, that we will defer to the people's body. That means the people that are elected by citizens, this body. And for some reason, we changed course. But I would also remind everybody here that there's also Article 1 of the Constitution. And Article 1 of our Constitution says all political power is inherent in the people, right? And that's what the referendum clause, the initiative, the recall, all of these populist amendments, all of these populist concepts go to the heart of our Article 1 of our Constitution that says all political power is inherent in the people. Now, I don't know if there's a constitutional rule that says Article 1 trumps Article 9, right? I don't know if there is. Maybe it's like baseball, Mr. Speaker. Article 1 and Article 9 are equally important. But in baseball, tie goes to the runner, and in Washington State, tie goes to the people. Let's let them vote on it and see which one they think is more important, Article 1 or Article 9. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
I'm going to urge the body today to accept this amendment. What this amendment does, it does put it in the hands of the people, and it does provide certainty. What we know is certain is that we can balance this budget without any tax increases. By putting this referendum out to the people, it will let them to decide whether they're going to be the ones to pay for this or not. Education is our priority. We should be funding it first, and we should be funding it within existing revenue. We have proven that we can do it. The Senate has passed out a bill showing that they can do it, and we need to adopt a philosophy, just like our governor ran on, Mr. Speaker, that sends things to the people and doesn't allow us to increase taxes on the very people that we need to keep employed, Mr. Speaker. This is absolutely ridiculous that we wouldn't want the people who elected us, who sent us here to do their work, to not ask them if this is their priority. It is our constitutional priority to fund education first. The very underlying idea that this bill puts money into the education fund trust account is a little ludicrous anyway, knowing in the last 2 bienniums this fund's been rated. It's not been rated, Mr. Speaker, to fund education. It's been rated to fund the other priorities that the other side of the aisle wanted to fund. Please adopt this amendment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's make sure we understand what this amendment does. It eliminates the emergency clause. That's all. We know that in the course of this dialogue over the next days and perhaps weeks, there are a number of proposals that all address the core concerns that have been raised. We are all committed to our children. But I'm going to tell you a story, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to tell you a story about a person in my district who's laying awake at 3 o'clock at night because he's lost his home, because he's trying to keep his doors open. And we're saying here that his voice doesn't matter. This is about small business, Mr. Speaker. These tax packages that we are talking about are not about the big boys. They're not about the multi-billion-dollar corporations. They're about those who clean houses, who do our laundry, who mow our grass. They're about those who work hard every single day and don't know how they're going to pay their mortgage next week. That's what this is about. And we're saying that we don't have the same duty here that they're having to deal with every day and night of their life, Mr. Speaker. People are hurting. What don't we understand? People are hurting. I sat with a business owner in my district and watched the tears flow, a first-generation immigrant. And do you know what he said to me, Mr. Speaker? He fixes cars. He's trying to do what is right. And with tears flowing down his eyes, he said, Mr. Speaker, had I known, I would have stayed in Russia. This isn't about the billion-dollar corporations. This is about the small businesses in our communities. And we have a duty, by golly, by God, to give them the chance to weigh in. This is a reasonable amendment, and it will be a sad day if we say that we cannot even abide by the standard protocols, that we have to accelerate this new tax on them. Give them a chance to speak, Mr. Speaker. Remove this emergency clause.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been a lot of talk here about how important education is to this body, and it is. But I suggest there is one other group of people for whom education counts even more, who hold it more precious even in this body, and that is the parents of the state of Washington. They too value education every bit as much, if not more so, than this body. It's their children, after all, who our public schools are educating. But those parents are also taxpayers. Those parents are also small business owners. Those parents are in the unique and important position to weigh how much education matters as against their job, as against their business, as against the future of the fragile economy in which they are struggling to make their mortgage payments, wondering if they're going to keep their job, wondering if their business will stay open another few months. Mr. Speaker, the people who need to weigh in on this matter are the parents of the children who we want to educate, because they can weigh, they can balance the interests that are competing in this tax increase. Give them that opportunity. Pass this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in strong opposition to this bill. If we didn't really realize it, we've been in a recession for about 5 years, Mr. Speaker. This bill would place additional taxes on our citizens. And this bill really attempts to tax our way out of a recession. Tax our way out of a recession. It won't work. To the tune of $900 million burden to our businesses and our individuals and to our self-employed. So that means less jobs, Mr. Speaker, less employees, and my great fear is that it's going to extend this recession. We had many people testify in our committee, Finance Committee, last Friday. One of the most telling ones was a man that appeared and said he had to lay off his employees due to the recession. He had one employee left. He had a decision to keep his business open, keep that employee, or mortgage his house. He chose to mortgage his house. He says if this tax bill passes, he's going to have to let that last employee go. And he's still stuck with the mortgage. The primary problem we have is that the B&O tax is the biggest factor in this package, in this tax bill package. And I just hope everybody realizes really what the B&O tax does. It's a tax on the gross, not on the income. So what it does, it picks winners and losers. There's a multiplier effect. The 0.3% increase might sound small, but to a lot of businesses with high gross and a tight margin of income, that's a huge tax increase. And it could be up to 40 or 50% tax increase. So what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is we're taking a huge hatchet or butcher knife to much of the revenue of our individuals and businesses instead of a scalpel and carving out what we need to do and be very careful about it. I certainly acknowledge that education is very, very important to this state. I would not be so adamantly against this bill if I didn't have full confidence that we are and can fund education without this $900 million of additional taxes. 2 of the 3 budgets that have been proposed do not have a tax increase, Mr. Speaker. I'm confident we can get there without a tax increase. So we can fund our education without adding new taxes, which will hurt the citizens and businesses of this state. So I strongly urge a no to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been references to Article 9, Section 1 of the Constitution. There's actually been a very relevant ruling just last year on our obligations under that section of the Constitution. May I read one line from that ruling?
As long as it's germane, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The state must amply provide for the education of all Washington's children as the state's first and highest priority before any other state programs or operations. Okay, that seems pretty clear to me. Unless we're talking about advocating for fund education last, we've got a bit of a red herring here. What this is really about, it's not a package for education. It's a package to keep up with the runaway caseload growth in a lot of our entitlement programs. And we need to be focusing on what limited resources we have and where we can be putting those resources for the maximum impact on this state's economy. That's going to require some political courage. And if I can drill down on one specific area that this tax passage addresses, I'd like to take a look at high tech. I'm a little partial to high tech, coming from that industry, and we tend to focus on the big two, but I want to focus on what's beneath the iceberg in this case. We focus on Microsoft and Boeing, but we've got tax preferences right now here for the construction of facilities for advanced computing, advanced materials, biotech, electronic devices, and environmental technology. These are high growth areas. This is the engine that's going to be driving our economic recovery. We look at employment multipliers for this area. Boeing, for every 1 job that we hire at Boeing, we have 4 jobs in support staff. These are the people directly impacted by these tax preferences. For every person we hire at Microsoft, 6.8 people get a job. So let's reduce this to what the real question is here. Are we making a decision between jobs and managing caseload? Between jobs and having the integrity and resolve to prioritize in our budgeting process to ensure that we're investing our limited resources where they can have the maximum impact. We need our jobs and we need political courage, and that's why we don't need this tax package. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the comments about how we care for children and how we educate children in this state. I think that's vitally important. One of the committees I serve on and have for the 9 years that I've been in the House is the Early Learning Committee. And why am I serving on that committee? Not so that we can educate young children necessarily, but maybe we can get their parents engaged in their educational process. I think that's the benefit of early learning. That's why we're doing that. But the best thing we can do for children who are at risk is not make them be at risk. And how do you do that? You make sure that their folks have jobs to support them. That's one thing I think we don't tend to understand a lot on this floor, is that it's the jobs that drive the economy, that keep the people hired. I saw some interesting statistics in a committee a couple of weeks ago about the impoverished areas in this state, the folks with the highest unemployment rates. Well, guess what? There were the highest suicide rates as well. Having a job is something that is imperative for people, and it gives them a sense of worth and a sense of well-being. And I think sometimes we fail to recognize that. Do I want to do great things for struggling families? You bet I do. But I think the best thing we can do is make sure that we're not driving jobs out of this state by overtaxing industries. I make sausage and I make laws, the two things you should never see being made in this world. But they're both extremely similar processes. Your product starts out looking like this, and by the time it's done, it looks completely different. And I just would submit to you that it's really important that as a small business owner myself, and I've struggled. I have a passion for this business because it's my business and it belonged to my husband who's deceased. But the reality is, I could have more employees in my business if they weren't taxing my gross receipts for that business. I haven't made a nickel off of my business. I make a darn good product, though, and so I want to keep going with that business. But if we continue to egregiously tax business owners who are providing those essential jobs that are helping keep our families healthy, we are cutting ourselves in the throat. And I would please ask that we put this bill down and take a look at a nice balanced budget that's going to get us out of here without adding additional agony to the folks that are making and providing those jobs in this state.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm at a little loss for words here, and I don't want to repeat a lot of what's been said, but I just want to share a couple stories with you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank God every day for my parents. I grew up in a great household, and again, I just thank God every day for that. And my timing in starting my company wasn't great. It was 3 weeks before 9/11. And I still remember that morning, and that happened, and I had rolled some big dice in resigning from the firm I was working for and starting my own. And in the days after 9/11, my dad came to me, and I was pretty distraught over this whole thing and how I was going to possibly even get through that month. And I still remember what he said to me, and he had run a successful business. He said, when you can't control the revenue, control the expenses. Mr. Speaker, we're seeking to try to control revenue that we really can't control. We spend $10,300 per student in this state on education. McCleary didn't say just throw more money at it. It said fix it. We have not made a fair, paramount effort to fix it. Instead, we seek to just put more money at it. We're going to raise taxes. I stopped to get gas yesterday in my district on the way to come back here. I know the owner of the gas station. He comes out and starts talking to me about these taxes. And he's pretty astute. He knows what's going on. But the guy on the other side of the pump stops pumping. He sticks his head around and says, are you serious? How am I going to afford this? I met with my assistant yesterday to sign payroll. That happens today, Mr. Speaker. And I always make it a point to look at those names on the checks. And I'm thinking, this won't happen tomorrow if this bill passes. This will be over the course of the next year or so. Which one of these are we going to let go? And between me and my partners, every one of those employees was chosen for a reason. One of them just had a baby. Which one, Mr. Speaker? Which one, if this goes in the law, which one do we let go? I urge this chamber to think. We need to do some serious reforms. We do need to fix education. We need to fund it first. But we can't just keep digging into the pockets of the taxpayers. There's not much left there, Mr. Speaker. Vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill. I'm sure it's not a surprise to anyone. You know, we've heard that children deserve an education. They do. And they can get that education without this bill. But by the same token, Mr. Speaker, their parents deserve a job. And with this bill, they won't have it. The extension of the B&O tax surcharge is a tax increase. It's one that for the 3 years that it was promised to be limited, some of our employers have said, okay, we'll just eat this. It's only 3 years. We'll muddle through. We'll make it work. Well, now that it's going to be permanent, they realize they can't do that any longer. They have two options, Mr. Speaker. Two options. Raise their prices and hurt consumers, or lay off employees and add to the unemployment rolls. Mr. Speaker, since the start of the Great Recession, we are still 58,000 jobs behind. Our revenues have recovered. Our jobs have not. And if you look at the curve for revenue recovery and the curve for job recovery, they're very similar, but jobs are lagging behind. And what that tells me, Mr. Speaker, is there's another solution to increasing revenue to the state. And that solution is to put this bill down and move other bills that will increase job opportunities. And as those people are working, they will have disposable income that they will go and purchase taxable items. And that will increase our revenues. And we can do that without any kind of a tax increase, without extending a tax, without increasing a tax, without adding a tax onto something that it hasn't been on before, which is what's done in the underlying bill. We can do that. The non-resident sales tax exemption, Mr. Speaker, is going to cost jobs in our border communities. We know it's going to cost jobs in the Vancouver area. It's going to be even more devastating in Cowlitz County. We just lost a Sears store over the holidays. It's gone. That's the fourth major retailer to be lost from Longview in the last 20 years. We have people from Oregon that come over here to shop because they don't have retail. They won't continue shopping here, Mr. Speaker. Those jobs will go across the river. I want to talk to you about a lady who works in your district, used to live in mine, but now they've been redistricted. But she has a maid service, Mr. Speaker. Her business is expanding in Oregon. It's contracting in Washington. This bill will only make it worse, and she will move across the river. This is a bad bill. We need to vote no. When New York is cutting taxes by $2 billion, we're raising them by $1 billion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do me no harm. Do me no harm, Dave. That's what they said to me before I came down here, Mr. Speaker. That's what the local business owners in my district said to me. If we don't put this bill down, we are doing them further harm. After we were briefed on this bill, Mr. Speaker, I came out here during lunch and had a conversation with a local business owner up in my district. He owns a lumber store. A couple of years ago, he had 46 full-time employees. Today he has 22. He laid off 22 working families. Family wage jobs with good benefits. This is a good company, Mr. Speaker. He's a good Christian man, and he tells me every time I talk to him, Dave, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep employing these people. And if we continue down this road, I'm not going to make it. He's the largest private employer in that community, Mr. Speaker. He's not going to be able to do it if we continue to tax him and continue to down that same road. During our conversation, we talked about the greater economy. He said, Dave, our economy needs to be on the improvement street. We need to continue to grow our economy so I can put people back to work and other people in our community back to work. He says, Dave, you're a cop. You need to be the economy cop. You need to go out there and make sure that we are on a one-way street to success in our economy. This is not the way to do it, Dave. That's what he told me. This is not the way to do it. You're on a one-way street. If this bill passes, the economy cops need to write this body a ticket for being on the wrong street, going the wrong way on a one-way street. Put down this bill, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any further remarks?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you have a very fine nose. Every person...
Why, thank you, Representative.
Every person in this room has a very fine nose. And the reason I bring that up is there's this old colloquialism which says, why would we cut off our nose to spite our face? Contained within this tax bill, and that's what this is, an increase in taxes, is a 1.92% tax increase on cargo. This 1.29% increase on cargo, gross revenue associated with cargo that goes through our ports, is 5 times higher than that in Washington and that in Oregon and California. Now, if I'm a shipper and I'm going to ship a container, why would I go through Washington State when I can send it through Oregon, California, or Canada? I find it so interesting because I've been in government for 34 years. I've been on a city council of one of the largest cities in the state, also as mayor. I've seen this happen over and over where government will expand to fit the money available. We all have wonderful ideas. We all have wonderful intentions. We all have things we want to do. What we have to do is live within our means, just like our families. This 1.92% increase in taxes on our cargo will translate into a loss of jobs. It's not just any jobs. It's jobs for longshoremen. It's jobs for, I'm sorry, we have to be politically correct, longshore people. I'm sorry, I'm female, I believe in that. We also have a loss of truckers, railroad workers. I sit on the Transportation Committee. We talk over and over about how important it is to help our ports, to help the Port of Seattle, to help the Port of Tacoma. When we lose 9,000 jobs because of this increase in taxes, there's no truckers to ride on our roads that are now improved. Where is the common sense in this? We had a family in my district. This was tragic. They had been foreclosed upon. They were evicted. We had a teacher came to the city council in tears saying, what can you do to help this family? They stayed on the bus all night to keep their children warm. I raised 6 children. They wanted them to go back to the same school in the morning. Very important. I raised 6 children, one from Korea. I can tell you, that family had it right. They were involved, parental involvement, no matter what it took. But I can tell you, what that father wanted was a job. We had people.
I'm sorry, Representative, your time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, I'd never given your nose much attention, but since the lady from the 30th brought it up, it is quite nice. I rise today in opposition, of course, to 2038. I rise speaking for the 18th District. I like to think I speak for a good portion of Southwest Washington, or at least consider Southwest Washington when I vote. And I also rise today as someone who's going to go out of here at the end of session and go back into the service industry, the landscape construction company that my family has owned and operated since 1961. And I think, to start off, I kind of want to say shame on me, because 3 years ago we bought it. We bought the line that the 0.3% B&O tax increase was temporary, and we absorbed the cost. We didn't pass it along to our customers because, A, the economy's tight, our industry has very thin margins, and if we raise our prices, we're not going to get the business. But third, we just really believed that it was going to go away. We were going to step up to the plate, and we were going to help out. This is being sold as a loophole, an extension, whatever you will, but it's not. This is a $534 million tax increase on small business. I'm quite jealous of the gentleman from the 24th because I believe the gentleman from the 24th has found the governor's secret sauce. All he has to do is raise his revenue, and then his balance sheet's going to work out. The rest of us can't do that. When I go out there to bid a landscape construction job, we're counting pennies. That pencil is so sharp, we're lucky if we're making 10% on a job. What we're proposing here is absolutely a tax increase, and it's a tax increase that's going to affect not only our bottom line, but the bottom lines of our families. Another thing in this bill, Mr. Speaker, and I think you and I could go down to the Port of Vancouver, and we could take a walk, and we'd see a sea of Subarus, right? Subaru comes to Vancouver, they drop off their cars, they ship them around the country. Well, there's part of this bill that taxes those imports, and taxes them pretty heavily. Cars, trucks, farm equipment, whatever you want to pick. And it's easy to say, you know what, Subaru can probably take that tax increase, right? But Subaru employs a lot of really expensive, really smart people that's going to be able to tell them, if you avoid Vancouver and go to Portland, you're not going to have to pay this B&O tax. Now, what we haven't really talked about a lot is the ripple effect. I think we're going to have a lot of longshoremen and warehouse workers that become Republicans overnight because they're not going to be able to unload those cars. They're not going to be able to store them. We're going to have mechanics. We're going to have security guards. We're going to have truck drivers, a whole host of people that are going to find themselves with less money in their pockets at the end of the day because Subaru said Washington's not a good place to do business. Mr. Speaker, $900 million in additional taxes over 2 years is what's being proposed here. And I guess my question is, where does that $900 million come from? The average American has, my time's running up. I oppose this legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Any further remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just a couple of points as we close this up. I think that actually we've done a pretty good job of refuting the idea that this series of taxes is about education. The average taxpayer, when he finds out that it's 1% of the total budget, will wonder, why on earth can you not absorb that in other areas? And when we go on to say that the budget from the other side of the Capitol funds almost as much without a new tax, and that this bill requires $900 million in order to put only $300 million more back into education, I think most people will agree that this isn't about education. What it is about is raising taxes. And I guess the thing that I feel the worst about in this whole package is that we've had a lot of talk about the people that need to pay more tax. And, the truth is, there's some openness on this side to look at a tax code that makes a little more sense. But what's so sad here is we have gotten down, we've talked about over 600 exemptions, and what happens when we get down to the end of this bill, after the industries and business groups that can afford to pay the best lobbyists have gotten themselves taken out of the bill? About half the bill, in fact, over half the bill, Mr. Speaker, isn't a tax exemption. It's an extension of a supposedly temporary tax on what, in a lot of senses, are the smallest organizations in the state. In fact, I don't think most people would even recognize a lot of these organizations as businesses. It's Bonnie Littlejohn, who's cut my hair for 35 years. It's people that go out and work as self-employed people to cut people's lawns or to do tree services. A lot of people do that as a family. And you know what's going on with them, Mr. Speaker? They're not failing to pay their share of taxes. If they're self-employed, first of all, they're paying sales tax on most of the things that they buy for their family and their little business. They're also paying, I forget whether it's 13 or 15% self-employment tax on top of their income tax, and now we want to take more. And Mr. Speaker, these are just struggling people. These aren't the wealthy. I realize that this includes some lawyers, but for the most part, they're the people that work out in my district where we don't have corporate jobs anymore, who are just trying to make an everyday living. And, my wife's a teacher, Mr. Speaker, and we talk a lot about the problems of education. One of her problems is so many of her kids are coming from struggling families, and many of these families are trying to be independent. They're not on government programs. They're trying to make their living in the businesses that they have traditionally operated themselves. Why on earth are they the ones that we expect to pay the most. It's not fair, Mr. Speaker. That's why you should vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks? The gentleman from the 47th.